The river ran slow that morning, dragging mist along its edges like a breath that had not yet settled. Light sifted through pale clouds, touching the reeds with silver. The man didn't come often, but sometimes the hush of this place pulled him from town, no to escape anything, just to listen. That morning, something felt different, not in the air, not in the trees, in the stillness, the kind of quiet that doesn't belong to peace but to waiting. He noticed the shape before he understood it, a pale blur just beyond the curve of the embankment, half hidden in silt and grasses. It didn't move. For a moment, neither did he. The closer he walked, the more the shape sharpened. Mud clung to coarse fur. One leg stretched awkwardly toward the water. The other tucked unnaturally beneath the trembling body. A dog. Thin, soaked ribs faintly rising and falling beneath a patchwork of dirt and bruising. Her eyes opened as he stopped a few steps away. Not fully, just enough to show the whites. The pupils barely responded. She did not growl. She didn't lift her head. There was no tail movement, no bark, only breathe, slow, shallow, resigned. He knelt slowly, his boots pressing deep into the soft bank. She blinked once, as if the motion cost her something. Her body had settled into the earth like she'd been there for hours, maybe longer. The river had swollen 2 days earlier from an upstream storm, and the banks were still soft, churned by retreating water. Around her, the mud held the shape of where she had tried to stand, drag, or shift. Faint impressions, streaks of effort long spent. The man reached forward, pausing just above her shoulder. Her ear flicked faintly. Not fear, not trust, just life, still somewhere inside her. "It's all right," he said, his voice barely louder than the breeze. "I see you." He didn't touch her, not yet. Just wait. Let her scent him. Let the quiet settle between them again. A heron cried further upriver, distant and shrill. She flinched. Carefully, he pulled off his jacket, folding it once and laying it across her hindquarters. Her body twitched, then settled. When he tried to lift her front legs, she whimpered. A small, cracked sound. Almost not a sound at all. The front paw bent strangely. The back one didn't move. He stopped. Waited again. The man's hands moved with care, his breath held longer than he realized. He wrapped her in the jacket and slid his arms beneath her, lifting as gently as the weight would allow. She was light, frighteningly so, but limp with exhaustion, her head resting against his forearm, eyes half closed. Mud dripped from her coat as she stepped up the slope, feet sinking slightly with every step. Not once did she struggle. Not once did she resist. The trees swallowed them quickly, branches bowing toward the path as if to hold the moment still. A crow called from above. Somewhere in the distance, the river kept moving. Behind them, in the place where she had lain, the imprint of her body remained, quiet, collapsed into the mud like a ghost that hadn't yet let go. Her weight shifted unevenly in his arms, fragile and uncertain. Each step up the path required more balance than strength, not because she was heavy, but because of how easily she might fall apart. Mud clung to them both, drying in pale crusts along her coat and darkening the sleeves of his shirt. Her breath trembled now and then, a faint flutter against the inside of his elbow. I didn't panic. It was something smaller, quieter, resignation that hadn't yet left her body. The man kept walking, boots pressing into the softened earth, passing through trees that leaned and murmured with wind. His truck was parked near a small pull-off, used mostly by fishers and weekend campers. The seats still held the faint scent of damp canvas and fuel. He laid her down across the back, folded a blanket beneath her side, and watched for a moment. Her chest rose, slow, uneven, but steady. The road to town was gravel for the first 3 miles. He drove without music, without speaking. A few times her paw shifted, that front leg, the one bent at the joint, and her ears moved toward a sound outside, but she didn't lift her head. Every bump in the road brought a small twitch, a sound like breath caught between effort and pain. At the clinic, the lights were low. It was early, and the staff hadn't yet switched on the front sign. The man carried her inside without urgency, moving as if not to wake something fragile. The receptionist, a young woman with soft features and tired eyes, didn't ask many questions. She took one look at the bundle of fur and dried mud in his arms and motioned toward the back. A tech met them halfway. "She's still breathing," the man said, his voice steady and low. "The front leg looks broken. Don't know how long she's been down there." The vet arrived moments later. Older, quiet, sleeves rolled past his elbows, hands already gloved. He didn't speak to the man much, just nodded and gestured toward the table. Together they moved her, one lifting her front, the other cradling her hips. Her body sagged between their hands, loose with exhaustion. When they placed her on the padded mat, her eyes fluttered, then closed. They worked in silence for a while. The exam revealed more than they expected. The front leg was broken, clean, mid-bone, likely from a fall or impact. A deep abrasion along her flank hinted at scraping, possibly from being dragged by the current or caught on rocks. Her pads were worn down, raw at the edges. She was dehydrated and underweight, but showed no signs of disease. Just wear it, see you in it. Long, drawn-out wear. The vet inserted an IV. The dog whimpered faintly, a dry, catching sound. Her head turned weakly toward the touch, but she didn't pull away. "There now," the man said, just above a whisper. "You're all right." They didn't try to clean her fully, not yet. That would come later. For now. They clipped fur from around the wounds, flushed grit from her skin, and wrapped the leg with support. She flinched only once, when antiseptic touched a tear near her ribs, then went still again. She didn't sleep, but she didn't resist. They made a space for her in the recovery room. Warm towels, low lights, and a shallow bowl of water she barely acknowledged. The man sat near the door, not inside, but close enough. He didn't plan to stay long, but as the minutes passed, something held him there. Not an obligation, not guilt, something quieter. She lifted her head once as evening neared, just a few inches, then let it fall. Her eyes met his, only for a moment. Outside, the wind pushed softly against the windows. The light faded until only shadows moved across the walls. In that quiet, in the soft rise and fall of her chest, the man made a choice. Not spoken, not written, just made. And it was enough. They kept the lights low in the recovery room. The hum of equipment moved in soft rhythm with the steady pulse of the IV drip. Her breathing, though shallow, had begun to find a quiet pattern. The warmth of folded towels held her body gently, layered beneath her like memory. A heater near the floor clicked on and off every so often, offering the kind of comfort she hadn't known in a long while. The shelter wasn't a large place. Not clinical, not cold, just practical. Walls lined with quiet kennels, corners filled with the smell of old wood and disinfectant. Here, dogs came and went. Some stayed for days, others never left. Most had names. This one didn't. Not yet. The man hadn't meant to stay, but he lingered in the hallway, watching through the small glass window as the staff moved around her. Each time someone entered the room, they moved slowly. No sudden steps. No loud voices. The shelter's veterinarian, a woman in her 50s with a calm way of breathing, stood near the table, fingers pressed lightly against the dog's ribs. Her brow furrowed as she counted again and again, her lips forming numbers silently. There was something fragile beneath the surface. Not just the injury, not just the weight loss or dehydration, something else. A wound they couldn't see. It wasn't until the second round of observation, after a light sedative had settled the trembling, that the truth became clearer. She was born recently. The vet traced a faint line of swelling along the belly. Her mammary glands, though collapsed now, held the residue of milk, dried, faint, barely noticeable unless one was looking. She'd been nursing. Maybe used days ago. The realization passed between the staff without words. A shift in the air. A quiet understanding. Somewhere, not far, there had been pups. The vet stood still for a moment, hand resting near the base of the dog's neck. Her fingers moved slowly, brushing once against the mat of fur. No collar, no tag. Just skin and mud and a heartbeat too thin for comfort. She's been searching, the vet said quietly, or running. Outside, the man lowered his gaze. That afternoon, they bathed her gently. Not fully, only enough to remove the grit that threatened infection. A sponge soaked in warm water traced the curve of her spine. She didn't resist, but her eyes remained open, tracking movement slowly as if unsure whether touch meant harm. They spoke to her sometimes. Soft phrases, just enough to anchor her in the room. "Almost done, sweetheart," a volunteer whispered. Her ears twitched faintly. Her body shifted under the towel, not with fear, but with uncertainty. When they reached the wound on her side, she stiffened. A small sound escaped her, caught between breath and memory. Not a growl, just a reminder that she was still here. They wrapped her again, this time in dry towels that smelled faintly of detergent and other dogs. She lay curled on a bed of fleece and foam, ribs pressed to the warmth. Her front paw, splinted and padded, stretched awkwardly but no longer throbbed with pain. Her eyes closed just for a moment, and her breathing slowed. In the hallway, the man asked the question that no one wanted to answer. "Do you think the pups—" The vet didn't speak for a while. She looked through the glass toward the animal sleeping now beneath heat and cloth. "She didn't leave them by choice," she said softly. Later that day, a team was sent back to the river. Not the banks, but the scrubland nearby. The reeds, the brush, the thickets of pine where animals sometimes hide. They looked for signs, disturbed grass, paw prints, and the hollow of a den. But rain had come 2 nights earlier, and with it, any trace had softened into silence. Evening settled across the shelter like a blanket. The kennels dimmed. Most dogs had eaten, some already sleeping in quiet mounds of fur and breath. She had not yet stood. But she had opened her eyes when someone entered. She had watched, not expectant, just a present. Her appetite was slow to return. A few bites of boiled chicken. Water lapped in brief sips, enough to keep the IV from doing all the work. Once, when a volunteer crouched to change the towel beneath her, the dog reached out with her uninjured paw, no to press, not to hold, just to rest against the fabric of a sleeve. A simple wait. A moment. The man visited again the next day, then the one after that. Never for long. Just enough to see her. Sit near. Be part of whatever healing might come, even if silently. He didn't bring gifts. He didn't push affection. He sat just beyond the edge of her reach, hands folded in his lap, breath steady. She watched him now. Not always, but often. And when he stood to leave, she didn't lift her head, but her ears turned toward the sound of his footsteps, soft and deliberate on the shelter floor. That night, the wind pressed gently against the window panes. The moon rose through streaks of thin cloud, casting a quiet wash of silver across the linoleum. Inside the recovery room, her body shifted beneath the blankets, ribs rising with each breath, steady now. A single whimper passed through the dark, not from pain, but from memory. It faded quickly, swallowed by the hush of night, and still the room held her gently, wrapped not just in cloth, but in the care of strangers who had chosen, without promise, to stay. The days passed gently. No urgency, no marked turning point, just small signs of return. The swelling in her leg began to ease. The wound at her side closed in slow stitches of new skin. She had not yet stood fully, but she'd begun to shift, her weight testing the strength beneath her ribs. Sometimes, when she breathed, It no longer caught in the middle. Sometimes she slept without flinching. The man still visited, always quiet, always the same way. He sat just to the left of the door, not inside, but close. The staff had stopped asking questions. They knew he would come. She did too. Her head no longer turned when he entered, but her ears always did. He never tried to touch her. He brought no leash, no collar, no expectation. He only watched and waited. Late one night, when most of the lights had been dimmed and the hallway held its usual hush, she made a sound that hadn't come before. It was soft at first, a strained whimper, drawn not from injury but from some deeper place. The night volunteer rose from her cot and walked to the room slowly, barefoot on cold tiles. Through the glass she watched. The dog lay still, eyes half closed, but her chest moved in short rhythmic bursts. Her front paw twitched against the blanket. Then another sound, a low, dry whine that stretched into silence. The kind of sound that pulls memory from sleep. The volunteer entered with care. The dog didn't startle, didn't shift, but her gaze followed as the woman knelt beside her. There was no wound to check, no fever, no sudden distress, only this fragile, aching call that seemed to rise from the space just beneath her ribs. "She's calling for someone," the volunteer whispered to herself. "Someone she doesn't know is gone." There had been no sign of the pups. No one had come forward. No collars had matched. The den, if there ever was one, had never been found. By now, too much time had passed. Even the vet had stopped searching for answers in that direction. But the dog hadn't. For animals, grief doesn't look like it does in people. It doesn't speak or ask. It lingers in behavior, in long pauses, in still eyes, in the way they return again and again to the same part of a room. For her, it showed in the evenings, after meals, after aftercare, care, after the last visitor had left. She would lift her head, just slightly, and make that sound. A low, reaching cry, as if some echo might return. The staff began to notice. They watched from the doorway as she scanned the space beyond the glass, the hallway, and the floor. Each night the same gesture, a shift of the neck, the eyes, and the ears pulled forward in fragile hope. Then silence. It was the man who first stayed past closing. They didn't stop him. He sat in the darkened corridor, hands folded, coat pulled tight against the chill. She didn't cry that night, but she did look at him longer than usual. Her eyes didn't drop as quickly. Her breath steadied. The next day, she took her first full step. It was clumsy and tentative. Her splinted leg bore no weight, but her other limbs pushed her forward in slow inches. She reached the edge of the towel, paused, then sank down again, ribs heaving from the effort. A staff member knelt beside her and pressed a bowl closer. The dog drank slowly this time, as if she knew it would stay full. That night the call returned, sharper this time, rising into a note that broke the quiet in two. The vet heard it from the office and came quickly. The dog stood again, half lifted on her good limbs, tail stiff, eyes wide toward the door. She was searching again. They brought in a blanket, the same one they had used her first night. It still held her scent. And something else? The faint traces of others. Puppies, once wrapped in the folds for transport, are now long gone to other shelters. As the vet laid it down, the dog lowered herself onto it, pressed her nose to the center, and let out a breath so long it shook through her chest. The man watched from the hall. He didn't move. For the first time, she slept with her body stretched, not curled. Her head rested near the edge of the blanket, ears twitching as if listening for something that wouldn't come. By the end of the week, the cries faded. Not all at once. Some nights were quiet, some brought back the old call, but they began to soften, to stretch further apart, like waves losing strength as they reached shore. She began to eat more. She drank without coaxing. She tried again to stand, this time with help, but with purpose. The man stayed longer now. Not every night, but enough. Sometimes when she looked toward the door, she didn't call. She only watched. Sometimes when he rose to leave, her eyes followed until he was out of sight. The staff knew now. The way people know without speaking. They knew that her cries had never been for them. Not even for the pups. They were for someone else, the one who had left her there in the mud, beside a river that pulled at her limbs and tried to carry her under. Maybe it had been an accident. Maybe not. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that someone had returned. Not the one she called for, but someone who had stayed, quietly, without asking for anything in return. One night, as rain tapped gently along the roof, the man rose to leave as usual. He hesitated, then stepped into the room. She didn't lift her head, but her paw stretched forward across the blanket, slow and steady, and came to rest just before his foot. He lowered himself beside her. His hand hovered above her shoulder, then gently touched the space just behind her ear. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. She blinked once, then closed her eyes. Outside, the night deepened. Rain moved through the trees in silver threads. Somewhere beyond the shelter walls, the river kept moving, steady, unbroken without turning back. And inside, beneath quiet breath and folded limbs, something began to settle. Something that for a long time had nowhere else to go. The road back to the river was longer than it had seemed before. The man drove in silence, the window cracked to let in the early autumn air. Leaves had started to turn. The edges of the woods wore rusted gold now, their stillness broken only by the slow ripple of wind and the whisper of things letting go. The sky above was pale, washed thin by a high sun, and the river, just beyond the trees, carried the same quiet weight it had on the day they met. She sat in the back, no longer wrapped in blankets but resting on an old cushion lined with towels that smelt faintly of cedar and dust. Her coat had grown back in patches. The splint was gone now, replaced by a limp that followed her like a shadow. It would never fully heal. The break had mended, but not cleanly. Still, she could move, and that mattered more than perfection. She had grown stronger over the weeks. Her ribs no longer showed. Her gait, though uneven, carried purpose. She responded now to sounds and turned her head at the call of her name, if softly spoken. The shelter had given her one. The man didn't use it. He never needed to. She always knew when he was near. They'd come to know each other through stillness, not words, in the soft pattern of breathing shared in a quiet room, in the weight of her paw near his boot. On the way, she laid her head down when he stood to leave, but never turned away. There had been talk, quiet at first, then more deliberate. Could she be adopted? Could she live in town? But no home could hold what still moved inside her, the pull of places just beyond the reach of fences, the memory of wild scents, the thread of instinct that had not yet unraveled. She was not a pet. She had not forgotten the woods. The man had not wanted to let her go, not because he believed she belonged to him, but because he wasn't sure the world would be kind to her again. And yet, as the weeks passed, it became clear that staying was not what she needed. Her eyes lingered longer at the window. Her body rose more often to stand at the door. She no longer cried at night. They arrived at the river just before mid-afternoon. The grass along the banks had grown tall, bending gently with the breeze. The water moved in quiet sheets, catching sunlight in fragments. It looked unchanged, but time had moved here too. She stepped down slowly, her back legs stiff from the ride. He didn't rush her. He walked a few paces ahead, then stopped. She followed, one foot uncertain, the other more sure. Her nose dipped low, sweeping the ground, taking in the place not as something new, but as something remembered. The spot where she'd been found was not marked. No sign of struggle remained. The river had taken the prints. The wind had lifted the scent. But still, She paused. Her body leaned slightly toward the water, her head tilted. Her ears moved in slow arcs, catching some sound far off. She didn't look at him. He didn't speak. For a moment they stood there, one remembering, the other letting go. She took another step forward, then turned, not toward the truck, but toward the trees that bordered the far side of the clearing. The man stayed where he was. She looked back once, just enough to catch him in her periphery, then kept walking. Her gait was slow and uneven. Her leg dragged slightly through the grass, but she moved forward with certainty. As she reached the edge of the trees, the wind lifted. It moved through the branches above, stirring the last of the summer leaves. She stopped beneath a cluster of thin pines and stood still, not waiting, just still. He watched until the light shifted and the shadows lengthened, until her shape became part of the woods again, until there was nothing left to follow. The man sat for a while near the water, on the same earth where he had knelt beside her weeks ago. He rested his hands against his knees. The river made no sound that could be held. Only movement, only change. Behind him, the road curved back toward town. Before him, the river went on. A hawk passed overhead, wings stretched wide, a single call cast across the open air. The trees rustled gently. Grass bent and swayed. He stood slowly and turned to leave, but not before glancing once more toward the trees, towards the place where something had been lost and something else had been returned. And as the sun dipped lower across the bend in the river, the breeze carried a scent of pine and soil, and the quiet echo of footsteps was no longer heard.